Welcome to this explainer. Today, I'm going to be stepping in as your legal counsel. And together, we're going to impartially review a really fascinating, highly volatile event, the April 2026 Washington Hilton crisis. Now, we're going to look at this strictly as a constitutional law case study. We've got a major late-night television host, the President of the United States, a shocking act of violence, and a massive corporate media entity caught right in the middle. It is literally the ultimate collision of satire, security, and free speech. So, here is our legal brief for today. First, Exhibit A, satire and security. Second, analyzing the suspect's manifesto. Third, free speech versus incitement. Fourth, precedent, 2025 versus 2026. And fifth, FCC and corporate liability. Let's just dive right in.
Section 1, Exhibit A, satire and security.
Let's lay out the timeline first, because it's absolutely crucial here. On Thursday, April 23rd, Jimmy Kimmel aired an alternative White House Correspondents' Dinner monologue. Just 48 hours later, on Saturday, April 25th, a gunman attacked the actual event at the Washington Hilton, interrupting a mentalist performance and sending the president, first lady, and hundreds of attendees just scrambling for their lives. By Monday, April 27th, we saw aggressive demands from the administration for Kimmel's termination. The incredibly rapid succession of these events is exactly what triggered this whole national debate.
Now let's look at the actual evidentiary exhibit, Kimmel's April 23rd broadcast. Using some pretty sophisticated editing, Kimmel spliced himself into a mock ballroom setting. The moment that got the most scrutiny was directed at First Lady Melania Trump, where he said she had a glow like an expectant widow. He also joked about her upcoming birthday, suggesting she was asking herself, what have I done? He poked fun at the president's age and health, contrasting Jesus with the president's doctor, and even threw in an impression of the couple meeting that referenced Jeffrey Epstein. The administration immediately flagged this entire segment as dangerous and corrosive.
Moving on to Section 2, Analyzing the Suspect's Manifesto.
Let's review the suspect's dossier. This is Cole Thomas Allen, and honestly, he completely shatters the traditional profile of a political assassin. He was a 31-year-old highly educated mechanical engineer and computer scientist from California. His professors actually described him as a borderline genius. He worked as a tutor and an indie team developer. He somehow bypassed hotel security and ended up shooting a Secret Service officer right in the chest. Thankfully, the officer's ballistic vest saved his life. Allen was armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, a .38 caliber pistol, and knives. He was also linked to a modern activist network called the Wide Awakes, though it's worth noting they've completely disavowed it.
But here is the really crucial part. Just minutes before the attack, Allen sent out a 1,000-word manifesto. This document laid out some highly specific, truly chilling rules of engagement. He categorized his targets methodically. Administration officials, primary targets. Secret Service, secondary, to be incapacitated non-lethally if possible. Interestingly, he explicitly excluded FBI Director Kash Patel from harm, along with regular hotel guests and staff. That level of meticulous planning is a vital piece of evidence when we start talking about the legal concept of incitement.
In this manifesto, Allen used the monikers Cold Force and the Friendly Federal Assassin. He justified his violence with this really intense mix of political grievance and religious ideology. He stated, "Turning the other cheek when someone else is oppressed is not Christian behavior. It is complicity in the oppressor's crimes," basically framing his actions as morally necessary. He also openly mocked the security at the Washington Hilton, marveling at how he bypassed checkpoints with an arsenal, and even used military jargon to joke that the security lacked a Madich machine gun.
All right, Section 3, Free Speech versus Incitement.
So the administration is essentially pushing for strict corporate liability here. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt went on the record stating that Kimmel's late-night monologue provided a cultural green light that was, in her words, indistinguishable from the suspect's manifesto. Their core argument is that high-profile satirical attacks, like calling the First Lady an expectant widow, actively legitimize targeting political opponents, and that's what inspires unstable individuals to commit physical violence.
On the flip side, Jimmy Kimmel forcefully fired back, wrapping his defense tightly in the First Amendment. He refused to apologize, categorizing the segment as just a standard light roast, pointing out the obvious age gap between the 79-year-old president and the 56-year-old First Lady. Kimmel's legal defense really hinges on timing and intent. He points out that his joke aired days before the attack, way before the suspect ever breached the Hilton, and therefore it inherently lacks the causal linkage you'd need to tie a TV comedy bit to an attempted assassination.
And that brings us to the absolute legal crux of this whole debate: causation.
To actually prove incitement under the First Amendment, which, by the way, has an incredibly high bar in the U.S., prosecutors or civil litigators would need to prove direct causation. They would need hard evidence showing that Kimmel's, well, specifically his expectant widow joke, legally triggered Cole Thomas Allen's assault. Now, given Allen's meticulous pre-planning, his manifesto, and the fact that his weapons purchases stretched all the way back to 2023, establishing that a joke made 48 hours prior was the direct, evidentiary, and foreseeable cause of the harm, that is an incredibly steep legal mountain to climb.
Which brings us to Section 4, Precedent, specifically 2025 versus 2026.
Get this, in September 2025, Disney suspended Jimmy Kimmel indefinitely after he made a controversial joke about conservative activist Charlie Kirk. That suspension was largely driven by major affiliate owners like Nexstar and Sinclair, who were threatening to refuse to broadcast the show. But flash forward to April 2026, and despite a literal assassination attempt and demands from the president for termination, there's no suspension for the Melania joke. The network is currently holding the line with a strong First Amendment defense. So what changed? Why the difference?
Well, it might all come down to the new guy at the top. Disney CEO Josh D'Amaro had just stepped into Bob Iger's shoes a mere 6 weeks before this whole crisis blew up. D'Amaro was suddenly facing his very first major free speech stress test. The big question is, does he bend to administrative and affiliate pressure to take the temperature down exactly like the network did in 2025? Or does he plant his flag firmly on creative freedom and First Amendment protections?
Finally, Section 5, FCC powers and corporate liability.
Enter FCC Chairman Brendan Carr. He's been repeatedly threatening to yank broadcast licenses from Disney and ABC over what he considers indecent or misleading content. He's launched investigations into the company's practices, creating massive top-down regulatory pressure. Think about it. When the federal agency that literally grants your permission to broadcast over public airways is publicly mirroring the president's demands to fire your host, the corporate calculus becomes incredibly tense. Add to that a staggering $110 million financial hit. Disney just took this massive loss from a sports carriage dispute with Google's YouTube TV. On top of that, history tells us that when Kimmel was briefly suspended back in 2025, streaming subscription cancellations for Disney Plus and Hulu actually doubled. So Disney is caught in this impossibly volatile economic crossfire. If they appease the administration, they alienate their core audience. But if they defend the host, they risk billions in regulatory retaliation and affiliate boycotts.
As the jury in this explainer, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Even if direct legal causation between Kimmel's joke and this tragic shooting is never proven in a court of law, will the sheer weight of regulatory pressure and corporate financial risk ultimately override First Amendment protections for political satire? How is this standoff going to permanently alter the landscape of American broadcast media and free expression? It is a massive constitutional question and one we are going to be watching very, very closely. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the hard questions.